Confronting the white bullshitism. Here, Somalia, a good example of the long-term damage made by Western previous colonial regimes. By the way, where the sanctions against Western countries. Not just about Somalia, but about almost all the wars in the world from 1914 to nowadays in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and illegal grounds such as Pakistan and Central Africa and Congo. Where is the expropriation of the Somalian, African, and Middle East natural and human resources after centuries of exploitation, extortion and looting? This is the typical Western powers behave. When they cannot undermine a nation, they will destroy the country in order to remove their long-term freedom and progress. Just like spoiled brats who are not willing to share or let others to make their own decisions, especially if such choices and changes don't include offering or maintaining the colonial servitude to Western leaders, the perpetuation of war and misery is the only path that will remain in the nations who fight back against imperialism. And is this Western imperialism the only actor for keep the tensions and the destruction to play this role during entire decades or even centuries till people simply faint on the insanity of desperation, suffering and isolation? UN and other institutions play with double standard and hypocritical view of the world to spread Western propaganda and allow this same Western criminal nations to apply political, diplomatic, and economic strikes on this devastated nations. It's against this white Western tyranny that we all need to stay together to understand this common disease that comes from this common imperialism and Western warmongering mentality, which should be our only struggle to remove this colonial white supremacist nations out from our nations and keep them out of the power, by not allow them to keep their dishonest and murder agendas. There is no foreigner investment in Africa, not even cheap workers, only slaves and exploitation, and is because of the self-enslavement made by the people deepest starvation and desperation stage of life that nowadays we can see the rays of national rage and revolutionary bloodshed that unfortunately also drag national citizens and innocent civilians to this modern anti-colonialism struggles and conflicts for freedom and sovereignty. We are playing childish games about human rights and democratic values while the biggest criminals don't hesitate on executing entire nations, entire races, with genocides and ethnic cleaning for the purpose of the so-called liberation and democratization of the world. We turn our eyes away from the fact that United States is sponsoring terrorists and make that their only official policy to inflict devastation and revenge over the nations who fight back against their imperialistic plans of slavery. We can witness the constant destruction of several democratic states and development or emerging nations, and we all ignore the Western actions when this nation's presidents and civilians are hanged, beaten to death, tortured and murdered without any fair trial, judgment, accusation, or any other legal procedures that we suppose to respect, according the same phony war crimes and human rights instances that often help this criminal Western nations to succeed in their warmongering policies. Meanwhile, we allow the same criminals to inflict sanctions over false claims and pure propaganda-made motives, false flags, and semantic reasons without relevance or facts whatsoever. We allow the Western sociopaths to impoverish and destroy entire continents without any type of legal right or logical reason beside the logical control and enslave of this people, where white criminals are constantly interfering with other countries' democratic choices and affairs in order to keep their spotlight on the most vulgar way to spread war propaganda and cultural deception. Do we all think that is normal to unreported almost 100% of the crimes and the proven facts in order the purification of this white supremacy species? Keeping an almost innocent and divine image of this brutal and savage culture of have drag our human civilization toward chaos, toward this eternal destruction, warmongering, and suffering way of human existence. While inflaming and distorting the reality in order to promote more racism and hatred between this very same race that is uniquely responsible by the 2 world wars and the subsequently use of the atomic bomb. Are we that ignorant? Blind? Irresponsible? Can we not understand the simple fact, the simple stage of nowadays? Where United States is threatening the world today with a new world war only because China, Russia, and other nations are challenging the economic domain of our world, the Western response to an attempt to establish a competition ground based on production, diplomacy, and economy was made by threatening all of us with nuclear alienation. How can we even accept this childish and defeatist Western behavior which prefer to destroy the entire world rather than play fair and play by the rules that they always claim to fight for? Don't we have enough dose of hypocrisy and bullshitism coming from this same Western parasites? Don't we have enough corpses around the world to tell us who are making this troubles all along? I don't need to see much news or pro-Western propaganda to know how much blame and shame is actually running in all this white nations. Their nonsense and desperation is bigger than their own personal humiliation. Their racism is configuration of their inferiority and mass genocidal mentality, hunting them in their everyday life. From the most obvious nations such as United States, England, or France, to countries like Canada, Australia, or Germany, but never forgetting the most phony and hypocrite of all, the helpful nations of North Europe such as Denmark, Netherlands, or Sweden that shamelessly hides their contribution to the Middle East genocides and their enormous contributions on spreading the white supremacy ideologies. They also send their warmongering machine, and they also make their racist and anti-anything non-white propaganda against everything who do not support their imperialistic and colonial profit. The Scandinavian hoax, nations of faceless shame, disguised of civilized values, evolved and peaceful society, which seeks to convince us all that they are not racist, and that they are also very intelligent, free, and tolerant. That is highest level of the white bullshitism, the real and tremendous threat and lies that will drag our world the worst world war in history, the fake and shameful propaganda that we should be all working to debunking such nonsense and non-factual BS of European so-called modern countries. We all should work every day in order to relocate the fair blame on this disguised murders of European phony societies and barbaric human values, and make them join the wall of shame and judgment to sentence this and other countries such as United States and UK to pay back for all the misery and destruction around the world. They take our lands, our resources, our cultures, and they take our freedom, and our humans' rights. Now is time to take that back from these criminals before the world become irreversible destroyed by a Western nuclear war. This is the perfect time, maybe our last chance to refuse the white supremacy narratives, to denial all this westernized savage way of life, to avoid this war interventions, occupations. It's time to stop accepting this delusional and sociopath way of doing diplomacy and democracy and really expel these criminals out of our nations, and take back everything, literally every single thing took by their colonial and racist instigation through the history. Since the moment that this Western disease never really stop operating against all our freedoms and sovereignty, is more than logical, perhaps more than fair, is indeed our exemplar right to charge back for all the destruction, especially when the changes of modern times didn't never bring any kind of white or Western redemption for all their atrocities, and how anybody well informed can easily confirm that not just none of that imperialistic and colonial behaves ever stop, as have actually getting worse and more widespread through the curse of history. We cannot provide any mercy toward the criminal. It continues to kill people around the world, much less granted any kind of forgiveness to this murder who did not even try to be innocent and is always being caught killing more and more innocent people, especially when the psychopath does all this in more brutal, violent, and inhuman ways than never before.